My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. Hello, welcome to part 2 of our 3-part conversation with Pereus. This conversation, we continue talking about all things cold calling, talk a lot about scripts, adaptively applying scripts. According to Ryan, if you're cold calling off of a script, it's not really a script, it's multiple scripts, and you can apply them adaptively. We talk a little bit about trust, authenticity, and he gives us some tips for the new cold caller. Hope you get something out of it. Yeah, so actually, I think maybe script is in some ways the perfect word, right? Because if you're in a theater production, it doesn't happen exactly the same way every time, but it gives you an outline, right? It gives you a game plan. Yeah. Okay. I know that before we move into this scene, I need to say this big thing. The details getting to there, and I find this to be true in presentations, that there are in fact certain things that you have to say in precisely the right way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, out of we do long presentations in academia, an hour, 60, 90 minute presentation. There are probably going to be 5 or 10 things that you need to know exactly what you're saying. It's written like poetry. And then the rest of the stuff, you can kind of wiggle around and go backward and forward. And your talking points, it's fine. But there are certain concepts or ideas or requests that if you don't phrase them exactly right, you don't lose like 10% of the value if you get it 10% of the way wrong. It just drops to 0. It's completely nullified. So I buy into it. I buy into what you're saying. Now, one of the things that we had kind of discussed covering was this idea of adaptive selling. And I think we're kind of already teasing into that idea, right? So I have a script, I have a game plan. I know that there's certain steps I need to hit. There's probably an order and a sequence to those steps. We talk a lot about adaptive selling. When we're teaching students or giving a training, we talk about different personality styles. And it's not just us. Everybody does this. Different personality styles. Oh, if they're, really aggressive and short on time, you do there's certain pivots that I guess everybody knows. But beyond that, the idea of adaptive selling, I think, gets really vague, right? And I struggle with it because I think it's true, but I don't know always in what way or how to explain it, because changing something isn't really adapting, right? You can be schizophrenically just changing every 2 seconds, well, that's not strategic, meaningful adaptation. That's just you not being consistent, right? So we can sometimes conflate adaptation with inconsistency. And I think we want these to be very clearly distinct things. So tell us your thoughts on adaptive selling.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was just thinking of a podcast that Jordan Peterson talks about chaos versus order. Order provides an easy way to know what's going to happen. In chaos, it's unpredictable, but usually new order or new ideas are in the chaos. And so there's a little bit of a balance there where you want a little bit of chaos, especially when you're in new places or a new combination of market and message and product, right, and SDR. But you also need to be able to measure appropriately so your investments aren't going wild and unpredictable. So when we look at the different, there's so many layers to adaptive selling because, like you said, based on archetype or personality type, you might need to use mirroring in order to match them, or sometimes, act completely opposite to them to kind of break a pattern interrupt, or conduct a pattern interrupt. But when we're looking at the data that we find, and again, one of the reasons I love this is because we get so much information about markets, and we can begin to generalize the different archetypes is the word I keep using, but types of markets and what script frameworks work within those marketplaces. And this is a huge finding for us, and has changed H2H sales scripts in its design to make it easy for our team to know how to adapt their script, actually account managers, when they set up, to the market they're calling into. So, for example, we know that when we're cold calling, we are speaking to adult human beings about a sales conversation. And again, we're okay with them knowing it's a sales conversation. So when you're speaking to a human, there's only a certain number of things that can be possible for them to, accept a next step meeting and be interested in what you have. And so there's no matter what we're doing, there will be always some things that we say no matter what. But how we go about that is different from market to market. So for instance, we have three main script frameworks. We have what's called a consultative conversation, the no bull script, and a survey script. So the consultative conversation is more when someone is sitting in an office and they have a little bit more time. They're sitting in an office, they pick up the phone. I have an opening statement, maybe a little bit of value, and then an opening discovery question. Allow them to speak. I speak a value statement back, ask some more discovery questions, and then ask for a next step. Okay. But that's not the same conversation I can have when I'm calling the owner of an auto mechanics store who's underneath a car that they're working on. They're not ready for a nice conversation when they're sweating.
A multi-minute chit chat about their business. Yeah.
Yeah. You literally have like 30 seconds to get your whole pitch across. So I'm going to go with what we call the no bull script. So an introduction with a little bit more value so that they can see what it is that we can help them with, because we have to know their market well. And then a question to get them on a phone call within, a couple days. Hey, listen, I don't want to bother you. I just want to see if maybe we could talk about this when there's a better time. How's tomorrow at 8 a.m. before the day gets going? Can I call you back at this number? We'll send an invite. What's your email? Perfect. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Right. And that goes for not just auto mechanics, right? But, trucking owners. For whatever reason, we work with a lot of commercial insurance who reaches out to trucking owners. And a lot of times the owners are still driving around. They're not going to have time when they're in the truck. I could keep going, right? Saturated insurance markets. They've heard the pitch 1,000 times because they're also getting bogged down by insurance salespeople. So we have to be very quick and to the point and sharp. So that's the way that we've kind of been able to collect the data and say, in some markets, if we're calling school districts or Fortune 500 or medium-sized business owners or C-level, I'm going to go with a consultative. If I'm calling a saturated or on-the-go market, I need to use a no bull script. And if I'm doing something that's more of a qualification, right? Sometimes insurance, sometimes like e-commerce, logistics, there's a qualification that goes into it that makes it sound exclusive. And, there's something else that can be used with that information that they're going to want to know more about. So that's our way of kind of seeing like, okay, how do we categorize the marketplace and adapt, our general strategies for multiple, like bigger sized teams to deploy and be successful.
So when you say script, it's not a script, it's multiple scripts. You can pivot from one to the other. You can imagine that you're going to try to execute one, and then you get a signal that says, actually, this person's way too busy. You need to pivot to plan B.
Exactly.
Okay. So obviously adapting in your context means dropping to a different script. What other things or in what other ways do salespeople adapt in your context?
Yeah. When we go on the more sales, person level, I think that when we're looking at the personality types, we talk about something called emotional entrainment, and it's really, I got this from the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, and he talks about when if you're in a room with somebody and you're talking and they sneeze, a lot of times you can sneeze at the same time, or they yawn and you can yawn at the same time, and there's something kind of biological that's going on when your kind of rhythms are in sync. And while that usually happens in natural social settings, there's a way to kind of fabricate that, or I would, maybe that's a strong word, but like to create that in a sales conversation. And it takes a lot of attunement to the person that you're speaking to. And it's to your point, right? Like the whole mirroring situation. If someone's got their library voice and they're kind of slower, like I need to chill off my motor mouth and speak at their level and slow down the way I'm saying, because I'm speaking their language. And, that a lot of times that's very appropriate in markets like, for IT people, or engineers, or they're not necessarily people type A personalities, and they need to be spoken to a certain way. To take it to a different route, not just on kind of the mirroring and conversation, but also the channel. that they're most likely to reach out to or respond with, right? Like IT and engineers are more kind of logic focused and less people focused. So if they get something written that is relevant to them, they actually might respond better to that than a sales conversation, right? It might just by nature seem pesky to receive a phone call when they can respond on their own time, when, through their reflective brain and the way that they think through an email, right? Because they can process it, think about it, and then respond. So channel does make an impact as well based upon the person you're speaking with.
You mentioned in a prior conversation that, and you kind of alluded to it again here, that the tone of voice makes a big difference, and that sort of resonated with me because I, have had many a conversation with students where they all try to default, not all, but kind of all, many, they try to default to this, I don't know, character that they think that they're supposed to be when they're doing a cold call. And it's always the wrong character. It's hey, Ryan, it's excited. It's very excited. The voice is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, this is Willy Bolander. And then you if you haven't hung up already, your brain has already, you're disengaged. You know exactly what I'm doing. I'm calling to annoy you. You don't want to talk to me. And what I've often told them, the advice I've given is, you've got to, man, woman, doesn't matter. You have to sound like a 50-year-old man who's calling to write them a check or something. Like, you're calling with value. You need to slow down your rate of speech. You're getting excited. You're getting nervous. You want to communicate excitement, except in my experience, you often don't want to communicate excitement because immediately you get cut off. So you've seen some of that. Tell us about these sort of, and because then we're talking about things that are very subtle, right? I mean, a script is not very subtle, right? That's change your words, but this is very, very specific.
It's a hard one. Kind of looking at how you change. We talk about building trust in a cold call, and there's 3 ways that you do that. One is through a good product. We're not selling faulty products. You have to build trust in a good product. To build trust in your process, you don't want to one call close somebody, right? That doesn't work in the 21st century, especially on a cold call. But then the third one is the person, and they need to trust me as a salesperson. And we might not think that we're being mistrusting when we put on that voice that you're talking about, but it's not something that is spoken. It's something that is felt and received in that type of communication, especially on a call. There's some, I forget, it was like the 7%, 38, and 55% rule. It's like, if you're in person with somebody, 55% of your communication is body language, 7% is what you say, and 38% is how you say it. And take that on a call where you don't have the body language, and now how you say things is inflated quite a bit, relatively, right? And so the communication is in the delivery a lot of times. And so when you're delivering something that's not true to yourself, they sense that, and it can dig you in a little deeper hole, especially when you're usually starting in the negative on a cold call. And so I think if you are naturally a type A personality, that's okay, because that's going to come out on the call. I think there's just a little bit of maybe like pulling back on that based on the person, but if you are I'm a very even-keeled personality, generally speaking. So if I can just start off like even-keeled, and then if the person on their line is excited, I might have to up my excitement a little bit. It takes energy. But if the other person is more chill, I have to recognize that immediately and keep at that pace. So knowing what your default is, I think, is the point here. Like knowing what your true, authentic way of speaking is to the way you speak to your spouse, your friend, your parents, and then having that as your starting point, because that authenticity communicates trust, and then you can adapt from there. So that's kind of my observation and what we see with our team in success.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so imagine I just got hired. I'm a recent college graduate or a career switcher, and I just got hired into the sales job, and I have to call and set up some appointments for myself. I'm very nervous. I bump into you at the coffee shop, and I say, Ryan, thank God you're here. I'm about to have to go start a bunch of cold calls. What tips can you give me? What do you say to me?
So I think mindset first, right? Is the person's probably feeling a little cold call reluctance, and having a good mindset first is something that is easy to kind of step over. But the mindset of a caller is whatever happens on that call, think of it more like you're a coder or a problem solver and trying to make a puzzle work. You aren't taking any rejection that you're going to hear personally. Look at it like a problem to be solved. And any no is a way to learn on why and adapting that or changing it for the future. So that's how I would start, is let's just talk about mindset. You're going to get rejected. You're going to get hung up on, and it's going to feel at first crappy. And once in a while, I still get down, but the practice is to look at it like a problem to be solved. And then if you can continue to build that muscle, you can enjoy cold calling, because my favorite part about calling is that you'll never be 100% conversion. You can't convert 100% of your calls 100% of the time at all time. So that means there's always something to be learned about humans and the way they connect from 0 to 1. And so if you look at it from an education, what can I learn? What can I apply? Then, now your mindset is more, okay, man, what could I have said better? And then you say that the next time and it works, and you have that instant gratification of success, and that builds from there, that muscle. In terms of being practical, student at the coffee shop, I would say get used to having your first line said as confidently as possible and get into a question as soon as you can. The more that you can deliver that first opening and get them talking, the better chance you have of converting, because what's happening is the longer that you get them on the phone and have them talking, the more comfortable and trust they'll build, and the more opportunity you have to move them to a next step. So get that first line down and that first opening question so that every time you do it, it's the same. And you don't feel like every time you're talking to someone new, you have to come up with this whole new, insanely creative, brilliant joke or opener in order to connect with somebody. And that's simply not true. The faster that you can get them in the right frame of mind to think in and ask them a question, gets them talking, takes the pressure off you, and you can start learning about where they are with the product or service, which gives you more information to speak about as the conversation goes on. So start with those two things.
Perfect.
We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. And by the way, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and to rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.